Hello, and welcome to the Oak Spring podcast, where we celebrate the legacy of Mrs. Bunny Mellon through the work of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation. I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Season 3, Episode 2. Before we hear from our guest this week, I'm joined by Daniel Eady, our Director of Programs here at Oak Spring, to bring us up to date with current events, what we can look forward to in the coming months here at Oak Spring. It's been a very snowy start and cold start to 2026, Danielle, hasn't it, over here in Upperville, Virginia? And I think it's been a bit of a shock to some of the residents who have been here at the beginning of the year, too.
Yes, it's been quite a different landscape for our residents to experience, especially those of them who are here in sunny July and June and the sweltering Virginia heat are experiencing our landscapes in a snow-clad, icy winter wonderland. So a very different experience than those residents had earlier this year or in past years. Again, as we mentioned on our last episode, in February and January, we invite back past alumni to come return to us for residencies that are anywhere from 1 week to 4 weeks. So we just wrapped up hosting about 20 residents this winter.
And there's always a lot of applicants for that too, isn't there? Now that you're building your roster of alumni, it must be hard to choose for you.
Yes, it's very hard. These are people that we know who have been here once, and every year, of course, because our alumni roster grows every year, it gets a bit more competitive year by year. But it is something that we're committed to continuing in years to come, is to invite back people through this alumni residency.
Well, now that I would say that Oak Spring's back in full swing, it's not the busiest time of the year, but there's still plenty going on, and certainly for you in terms of programming and planning for the year. So as the winter, hopefully we're coming towards the end of the winter, end of February, March. What are you looking forward to in these coming weeks?
Yeah, so we are getting ready for spring, which is always a really busy time at Oak Spring. We will see our residency and fellowship application portal will open. So that is open February 14th all the way through May 31st. So we're getting prepared for the residency and fellowship selection process. We'll be welcoming our first brand new group of interdisciplinary residents selected for 2026. They'll arrive in the first week of March. And then in March, we have, of course, our bulb programs. We have From Wild Origins with Jason Delaney. We have a one-day lecture with him called Tulip Mania, and a one-day lecture with a daffodil expert, Sarah Van Beck. So those are the things that get us started in March. And then in April, we're really gearing up for our Virginia Historic Garden tours. So those are 2 days in April where we host about 500 visitors a day. And the tour is really focused on seeing the garden and the gallery, where we'll have a couple new exhibits.
And that's in terms of the exhibits. And I know you'd mentioned this before in a previous episode of the exhibits that will continue to change in the gallery.
Yeah, so we usually have 1 to 2 new exhibits in the gallery each year. So the exhibits that we have starting off this year will be Curious Allies, which is an exhibit with the American Society of Botanical Artists featuring lichen, fungi, and carnivorous plants by contemporary botanical artists, and that will be up through August. And then we also have a small exhibit of work by Snowy Campbell, a young artist that Mrs. Mellon commissioned to paint the interiors of her residencies around the world. So those 2 exhibits will get us through August, and then we'll transition over to a new exhibit, which I won't say too much about right now, but from a big picture perspective, it is featuring tulips.
Is there any point in the year, Danielle, which you consider the highlights of Oak Spring? Because now with the Rokeby Festival in the fall, there's so many variations. You've just had a musical interlude here earlier this month. There's various components now. It's more and more varied, it seems to me, each year. So is there such a thing as a highlight?
That's a great question. I think that if you ask different staff people, we might all have our different opinion of what the real highlight of the year is based on the many different resources and interests of what's going on here, I feel like we have at least one kind of major event or program going on each month that might be considered the highlight. So in April, that would definitely be our open day tours. In September, that would be our Rokeby Community Festival. In June, that might be our Feast in the Field dinner, which is a big fundraising dinner that we host on Rokeby Farm. So there's different things sprinkled throughout the year, but I would say roughly one kind of major event each month. But even in the in-between, we have residents coming in and out throughout the year. We have short courses coming in and out. So even though we might have those one-off bigger events, we have our kind of regular roster of things going on as well.
And you also have visiting guests such as institutions, research partners, and that sort of thing who visit in the interim certainly to the library as a resource.
Yeah, we do try and host relevant groups and researchers whenever possible, permitting it works with our schedule and that they're working on projects that relate to the collection. We recently had a group from the Yale Center of British Art, which of course we have very close ties with. That institution was established by Paul Mellon as well. And they brought down a couple of researchers and curators from the Barbados Museum. They are still in the very early phases of working on a project together, but there were some materials in our library collection that was helpful for them to view at this preliminary point in their research project. So we do try to support groups and organizations like that whenever we can.
Are there any deadlines we should mention in terms of applications now for upcoming courses and residencies, Danielle?
Yeah, I think I mentioned the big one, which is the May 31st deadline for all of our 2027 residencies and fellowships. I'll also say that at the end of March, we have the due date for our 2026 music residency. So that residency will take place this year in September, the week prior to our Rokeby Community Festival. So musicians are welcome to apply as a group of 3 to 5 musicians. We're especially looking for groups that are creating music inspired by our local region, including Appalachia, the Blue Ridge Mountains, and kind of landscape inspired either old-timey music or bluegrass. So those applications are due at the end of March, and then we will let musicians know by the end of April if they've been selected for that program. So I would really hope musicians will help us spread the word about that. And then we have a few deadlines coming up for our short courses. Our Great English Estates with Paul Stamper, the application portal for that will close in March. He's a really terrific animated instructor. That class will be this year in June. And then we also have in March the deadline for our Reading the Landscape class with Michael Gage, which is one of our signature classes. It's the oldest short course, actually, that we've hosted here. It was the first short course we piloted. And that class is a really exploratory, hands-on experience. The students spend a lot of time out in the landscape, having discussions with Michael, learning about how you can literally read the landscape and look at trees and walls and what that tells you about the ecology of this place and the human history of this place.
And the best way to find out about all of these and the deadlines is?
Our newsletter. So if people go to osgf.org on that homepage, you can subscribe to our newsletter. And that is where you can get all of the deadlines and application links directly in your email. So I hope our listeners will go to our website and subscribe there.
And of course, don't forget to follow on social media, Instagram, Facebook, X. You're everywhere.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And of course, you can also watch the podcast on YouTube as well. It also goes directly, as well as your podcast apps, it goes out to YouTube as well. So there's lots of ways to catch up with the podcast and find out about the courses and programs here at Oak Spring. So Danielle, thank you as always. for hopping on the podcast each month and bringing us an update of what we can look forward to in the upcoming months here at Oak Spring.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
And joining me on this month's episode is Peter Crane, president of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation, who this year will be marking his 10th anniversary here at Oak Spring. Peter's specialism, of course, is in the diversity of plant life, which aligned with an opportunity in 2016 to create new programs focused on plants, gardens, and landscapes, while at the same time, of course, always honoring the legacy of Mrs. Bunny Mellon. So, on this anniversary, it's only fitting to reflect on the past 10 years and also look ahead to Peter's vision and goals. So I thought perhaps, Peter, we'll begin by reflecting on what your impressions were when you first arrived here at Oak Spring.
Well, thanks, Chris. I mean, it was really a wonderful opportunity, and moving from New Haven to this wonderful landscape was a real thrill. But of course, there was plenty to be done. This had been obviously a very private estate for a long period of time. Mrs. Mellon was very elderly when she passed away. Her husband having passed away more than 10 years previously. And so, there was much to be done here in terms of the physical assets, if you like, of the site. But there were also some, interesting things to do conceptually, exactly what programs could we and should we offer, and also plenty to do behind the scenes. Have we got the right personnel policies in place? Do we know how to run a payroll? All of those things had to be kind of developed from scratch in the very early days. So it was challenging, but it was exciting, and of course, we benefited enormously from some of the staff that we inherited from Mrs. Mellon, and we would have been absolutely lost without them.
Well, perhaps you could paint us a picture of what that actually looked like when you walked on the grounds then and the staff that you had.
Yes, I mean, very important were the staff in the library, Tony Willis, Kimberly and Nancy, who had worked closely with Mrs. Mellon, who knew the library, and they were extremely important in introducing me and others to the collection and reassuring us that the collection was really well looked after. Along with the library, we also inherited and developed a small security team, because we're always concerned about security for the library and the other assets on site. But beyond that, we also inherited some really astonishing people who'd been used to managing the land for Mr. and Mrs. Mellon, people who had been involved in ensuring that the facilities here worked well when the Mellons were in residence, painters, carpenters, terribly skilled people. And as I said, we would have been lost without them. And then into the team, we, of course, had to bring new assets and new skills for people who might, for example, run a website or do some social media or develop some programs or run some fellowships. So it's been a really wonderful opportunity to fuse long-standing employees who know this place well with a new team who are taking care of the more programmatic aspects of Oak Spring.
And by this time, of course, Peter, there had been some years before there was last horses on the property and all the pastures that were devoted, of course, to the thoroughbred breeding and training operation there for Mr. Mellon. So what did the landscape itself then look like to you at that time, and the opportunities that just the land itself, the wider expanse of acreage, specifically on Rokeby Farm side, what did that offer you at first glance?
Yeah, well, it's also important to remember that we now manage about 700 acres. But when we started, we were only managing about 250 acres. And that was because I came in the summer of 2016, and in December 2017, we purchased back from Mrs. Mellon's estate the Rokeby portion of the property, which had been, as you say, absolutely central in Mr. Mellon's thoroughbred racing operation. So looking at those 700 acres, well, starting really with the first 250, we wanted to know what we had on the land. And so we contracted with someone that I'd known for some time, Michael Gage, and he did a very thorough survey of, let's call it the Little Oak Spring side of the property, some 250 acres here on the east side of Route 623. And then when we purchased the Rokeby site, we had him do the same analysis on that side. So we had two great documents which gave us a baseline of understanding of these two properties. They enabled us to understand who had owned the property over time, how it had come into the Mellon's hands, how it had been changed over time, when new things were added, things that had been lost on the landscape. But it also pointed out, very importantly, some of the really interesting natural history components of this landscape. I mean, we're so fortunate to live in this part of Northern Virginia where there's so much land protected by conservation easements. But it's not just about quantity, it's also about quality. And so to understand in a qualitative sense, the ecology of the landscape was important to us. And we're still finding out things about the landscape. So, for example, on the Rokeby side, there's a small woodland. It's, I'm thinking now, 20, 30 acres. The historical documents show that it's been there for a very long time. It's certainly been there since well before Mellon days. And as we've gone to understand it, we've found that it actually contains a really nice and interesting, very rare habitat for this part of Northern Virginia, a wet seepage habitat inside the woodland with many quite rare plants. So that was quite a discovery. And similarly, in other places, we've come across trees that clearly predate the Mellon occupation and that might be as much as 400 years old. So understanding the landscape was important. And we continue to think all the time about how we can manage this landscape. As I walk around, of course, I see many interesting plants, native North American plants, but most of the grasses are very familiar to me from Europe. What we mainly have is a lot of acreage of European pasture grasses that were imported for the horse operation. And the question is, how should we manage that going forward? Are there special areas where there are more native plants? Are there areas where we can intervene in a gentle way to bring back more native plants? Or do we need interventions that are sort of more aggressive, if you like, to try and bring back some of these habitats to perhaps what they were like before the real emphasis on the horse operation during the Mellon years.
Once you had bought back that acreage, you mentioned now built it up to 700 acres. At that early stage, Peter, what percentage of that would have been farmed land and the rest in its native state, so to speak, where you had to balance the two of what their future might look like.
Yes, I mean, I think historically, I think all of the land that we now have was farmed in the 19th century. Go back to the early part of the 19th century. This was very productive agricultural land, managed, of course, by many enslaved people. Half the population of Fauquier County back in the middle part of the 19th century were enslaved. So I think we can be certain, reasonably certain, that much of the land that we now own was farmed quite intensively. And if you look back at the agricultural censuses from the 1860s and 1870s, you see that this was diverse agricultural land. During the Mellon era, most of what we have, and I should say in the past, some of it was put down to orchards. In the Mellon era, they certainly had an agricultural component to the 4,500 acres that comprised the estate at that time. And some of the land that we have was farmed rather than devoted to horse pasture. But probably not all that much of the land that we own was cultivated in that way or used for the cattle operation that the Mellons also ran. So what we mainly have is land that's been managed for horse pasture for, almost 70, 80 years.
And for you, though, Peter, personally, this might have been perhaps the largest acreage that you had to take on and manage. What did you find were perhaps the biggest challenges for you, given that this was a different land in a different part of North Virginia, in a part of the country that you were used to, and a lot of that land was something that you had to adapt to yourself? What were those biggest challenges?
I think, 700 acres is quite a lot of land. I think one of the biggest challenges is getting out on the land regularly to observe it, because, of course, it looks very different at different times of the year. Different plants come to the fore and so on. I think one of the things that one recognizes immediately is that in addition to this layer of European pasture grasses, we also have quite a lot of, pretty pernicious invasive species that are difficult to deal with. So getting familiar with those and figuring out what one can and cannot do. I think an important point is not only what we want to change, but also what we want to save and encourage. And that comes back to knowing what we have. So even today, as we look at the landscape, there are areas, mainly European pasture grasses, but we can see that there are native plants in there with great potential. So one of the things is how do we encourage those native species to fight back, if you like, against the pasture grasses. So I think, understanding the plants, understanding the ecosystems, it's new. It was new for me. But on the other hand, we had some people who are quite experienced. We've learned a lot along the way. And I think we now have a pretty good way of handling the land. One thing I should also say is that one should be careful in managing the land. I think we operate with a first do no harm kind of policy. Until you really understand what's going on, you could make some terrible mistakes. So I'll give you an example. We have two really large fields, just European pasture grasses. Yet they are the fields that the bobolinks, endangered North American meadowland bird, really favor when they move into this part of Northern Virginia in May and June. So, we could have said, let's get rid of those European pasture grasses. Let's try and install something with more native species. But in that case, that would have been a mistake, because we could potentially have upset these wonderful breeding grounds for these endangered North American birds, who don't seem to mind that what they're nesting in is of European origin rather than Eastern North American origin.
Well, that brings me to, of course, the birds, the ornithological landscape that you had, bobolinks being one, of course, that it is host to so many wonderful birds, Peter. I mean, that is a whole section right there in itself in terms of your overall management plan to consider the priorities for these breeding grounds for so many different species. How did you go about that?
Well, there's great resources locally. I think we owe a lot from what we've learned from Virginia Working Landscapes. They've been great partners. The Clifton Institute, also very knowledgeable. Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, lots of people who had good knowledge about the bird fauna in this area and gave us good advice. And the other was simply paying attention to and censusing the birds coming through. For me personally, one of the great delights is getting to know a little bit about the short-eared owls that come at this time of year, and that are absolutely magnificent. And it's really wonderful to see these terrific birds hunting during the day across our meadows. That's definitely one of the really great delights.
Have you become a photographer due to this?
I wish I had more time, because we do get the most beautiful views of birds and indeed other wildlife. If one had the time to sit quietly and take photographs, this would be a great place to do it. And in fact, we have some good photographic equipment. One of our team, Josh Rector, has now a fantastic inventory of bird photographs, all taken here on the property.
Let's talk about trees, Peter. Huge part of Oak Spring, of course. And the program that you have going forward, of course, the new Arboretum. Let's talk about what you had and how you assessed what you had when you inherited the property, so to speak, managerially.
Yes, well, that was really part of Michael Gage's remit. So for the two properties, the two surveys that he did for us, he mapped and georeferenced all of, let's call them the open-grown trees on the property. Obviously, he didn't do every tree in a block of woodland, but any tree that was standing out on the landscape was inventoried and GIS'd. So we have a complete inventory of the woody plants.
Explain, if you would, GIS for our listeners.
So basically geolocating each of these trees, and we now have relatively easily accessible high-resolution equipment, so we can get a detailed geographic location for every single tree on the property, and that can be fed into our broader computerized program that maps all of the property in electronic form. And so we were able to get a good survey of the trees. I mean, one of the great things about Eastern North America is the huge variety of trees that we have here. People don't often might take them for granted, but compared, for example, to the tree flora of the British Isles, the native tree flora of the British Isles, the flora here is really astonishingly rich. I mean, in the UK, we have 2 species of oaks. I think in Virginia, there are 20 or so species of oaks, and a number of different species, of course, here on the property. Among the species that we're very interested in are the white oaks, and they don't seem to be regenerating too well. In part, that's deer pressure. So one of the things we're trying to do is to encourage the oaks, and particularly the white oaks that are so important for wildlife. And of course, we also recognize that we're missing some species that used to be here, not least the American chestnut, which probably wasn't hugely common on the property that we now have, but it would have been around. It would have been much more common on the Blue Ridge. So, yeah, understanding the trees has been a delight. And, trees which you can only see in an arboretum in the UK or in people's gardens are growing wild out here on the landscape, and that's terrific.
Let's talk about the partnerships that you formed and research opportunities, academic partners, organizational partners that you selected to be a part of your big plan going forward, Peter, that may have evolved, of course, over time. But when you first came, who were the obvious people to partner with?
I think we had a great relationship with some of the organizations I've already mentioned, Virginia Working Landscapes, Clifton Institute, and so on. And they provided a lot of really good and essential guidance at the beginning for us. On the more academic side, we've had relationships with various places. We have a good relationship, for example, with Dumbarton Oaks that we are working with on various projects. I would say and of course, I should also mention excellent relationships that, in a way, we inherited from the Mellon era. For example, with the National Gallery, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, the Yale Center for British Art, all of which were so wonderfully supported by the Mellons, Paul Mellon. And so they have been natural partners for us. So, and they've all been very generous in sharing their expertise and insights as we've developed our programs. So, for example, the National Gallery had a wonderful, obviously has an amazing collection of paintings donated by Paul Mellon, and were very helpful as we sought to get high-quality reproductions of some of those paintings to restore them to the place where they once hung in the house. When Mrs. Mellon passed away, many of the paintings that she lived with were on life estate to the National Gallery or elsewhere. So it's been a pleasure to be able to bring them back as reproductions and have them hanging in the house to kind of retain a little bit of the spirit of that place. And National Gallery were very helpful with that. The Yale Center for British Art have also been helpful in for example, decorating the Broodmare barn, which we converted into accommodation with paintings, some of the paintings from Paul Mellon's equestrian art. But those relationships continue. So the National Gallery just last year, from the summer into the fall, had this wonderful exhibit, Little Beast, which was a collaboration between the National Gallery and the National Museum of Natural History and the Smithsonian. And we loaned quite a lot of material from the library, particularly our extraordinary collection of early paintings from the 17th century by Van Kessel, of insects and flowers, and they were an important part of the Little Beasts exhibit. And that exhibit was seen, I forget the exact numbers, but well over 100,000 people went through that exhibit, and so we're able to see some of the collection from Oak Spring as they went through that. So. That's something we're finding increasingly, is that we're loaning material from the library collection in particular to other institutions for exhibits that they're putting on. So that's an important partnership area for us.
That leads me to the library and the gallery, Peter. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of that during your tenure.
Yeah, I mean, we're so fortunate to have this extraordinary library that Mrs. Mellon built, and the rare books and manuscripts and broader collections that she housed in that library. Tony Willis and the team have done a terrific job over decades in curating that collection long before we came on the scene. And the catalogue is really quite exceptional. The level of detail in the catalogue is really extraordinary. You know exactly what we have, you know exactly where it is. We have all the records associated with it. The challenge for us, though, that we've been tackling over the last few years is to get that information into more of an electronic form so it could be searched and examined much more easily by people across the world. So in other words, so people know what we have and can request to see it, or that in the case of particularly rare material, all of the manuscript material we've digitized now, and we're making more and more of it easily available on the web. In fact, a good deal of it's already available for people to see, the absolute unique material that we have. So a big push in the library has really been to increase access to the collections through the electronic forms.
And then in terms of the gallery, of course, that's evolved considerably. And now, of course, is another gem, two gems side by side, the library and the gallery here at Oak Spring, Peter. And I must say that must be exciting for you to see the potential in both of those areas alone. But talk about the gallery, if you would, and how that has come along over recent years and what you're planning for the future to have more exhibitions.
Yeah, the gallery building was Mrs. Mellon called it the Memory House, and she, as the other houses were closed down that she had in Antigua or New York or Washington, special things that she from her life that she wanted to keep were brought back into what she called the Memory House, what we now call the gallery. One of the first things that we did was to create an exhibit, a pretty professionally produced exhibit on Mrs. Mellon and her family, to really kind of honor that part of the use of the gallery that Mrs. Mellon clearly had in mind. So we now have two little permanent exhibits in the gallery, one on Mrs. Mellon, one on her family, that give a background for visitors to the site, so they really can understand who the Mellons were and what their major contributions were and what the connections were. So, and then the rest of the gallery we turned into more of a rotating exhibition space. So, and we've had several different exhibitions there, which we change every now and then. You know, maybe. Once a year, sometimes twice a year. At the moment, we had in there last year an exhibit on the story of the Kennedy grave site that was unearthed by Eleanor Crane and Nancy Collins, and they produced with some excellent volunteers, produced a wonderful exhibit on that whole story. But we're now gearing up to have a new exhibit from the American Society of Botanical Artists that'll open in just a few weeks' time in the gallery, on focusing on plants that that live in conjunction with fungi or insectivorous plants that interact with other organisms in special ways. It's called unsung allies. So there'll be a collection of really first-class botanical art from the American Society of Botanical Artists that'll go on display in the gallery, as I said, in the coming weeks. And also a new exhibit that we're just putting together on a book that will be released next month called The Enchanting Interiors of Bunny Mellon. And I can say more about that book if you'd like to hear about it. But that exhibit will also be in the gallery and open this year. And then later in the year, the Botanical Artists exhibit will be replaced by an exhibit on tulips. So we use the gallery now as a permanent exhibit on the Mellon family, Mrs. Mellon, her family, but also as a changing exhibit venue. So when people come to Oak Spring, for example, during Virginia Historic Garden Week, there's something different for them to see every year.
One of the ways people get to know Oak Spring, Peter, of course, nowadays is visiting for various courses and programs that you host. Talk a little bit about, again, the evolution of this, how you prioritized when you took over the reins of what you would build in terms of these programs and courses, what that would look like to you if we could take you back 10 years, what that next 10 years to the present day looked like.
Yes, I think, our thinking on this has obviously evolved. When we first started, we realized that the broodmare barn needed to be converted into accommodation so that we could have people on site for courses to study the materials in the library, et cetera, et cetera. But we also, over time, decided that we could run short residential courses where people could come and stay for a few nights and really delve in deep to some particular topic. So that's evolved into a range of courses that we run every year, some on topics related to gardening, some on topics related to the library, some on topics related to the landscape. And those are our kind of residential courses that we can now accommodate. And I think they were kind of in the frame very early on. However, it also became clear that with that accommodation was really not suitable for anyone who wanted to stay for more than a few days, because there was really no catering accommodation associated with that accommodation here on Little Oak Spring. So part of the rationale of acquiring Rokeby, not only for the land and to ensure its long-term protection, but also to acquire the old employee houses on Rokeby that could provide accommodation for guests who wanted to stay longer than just a few days. So it's really the acquisition of Rokeby allowed us to expand into longer-term residencies for artists, for scholars, and others, because then they can live in one of the renovated houses and look after themselves, and we don't have to be looking after them morning, noon, and night. So we really have these two programs, one residential courses based here on Little Oak Spring, and then on Rokeby, longer-term residence for artists, writers, scholars who want to come to Oak Spring to study the resources that we have here. So
that in itself, that was a capital investment you had to make in renovating all those different staff properties, of which I think there's something like 11, is there, on Rokeby Road, on Rokeby Farm side?
We've done quite a lot of, let's call it deferred maintenance and renovations of these houses, some of which hadn't received much attention for quite a long time. And I'm now very pleased to say that almost all of them are beautifully renovated and provide opportunities for 2 or 3 people in an individual house to have their own private space, bedroom, bathroom, but to share a kitchen and a general living area. And that's working out very well for our residents. And over the course of a year, we'll perhaps rotate as many as 60 or 70 residents through Rokeby who are coming for periods between 2 and 5 weeks.
And a reminder to our listeners, if you are interested in any of these courses or programs here at Oak Spring, just visit the website at osgf.org, or you can drop a line to program@osgf.org too and find out more. And also sign up for the newsletter, not forgetting, because that's another way to find out about courses that are upcoming, of which there are so many. So I want to look forward now, Peter, if I may. But before we do, we have to visit the garden and the transformation of that garden, what you inherited and what you see today.
Yes, I mean, the garden is really, a wonderful asset, and it's something we've worked on really over the last 10 years, and I'm very proud of where Alyssa Montgomery and the garden team have now got the garden in terms of its maintenance and the way we look after it, which I think is very close to how it was looked after in Mrs. Mellon's day. Our approach to the garden actually was very much the same as our approach to the whole landscape. So several years ago, we got around to commissioning a detailed study of the historical development of the garden, very similar to the one that Michael Gage had done on the whole landscape. And this work was done by Ome van Sweden and resulted in a very, very detailed report on the evolution of the garden during the Mellon era, identifying what its most important features were and how providing advice and guidance on how it could be managed for the future. And I think, that's been an incredibly important document, and we learned a great deal from that work. So in terms of managing the garden, we have a good framework, we have a good understanding of what we've got, what's important, how we need to manage it. And we've been able to make some investments in the infrastructure. So, for example, replacing the roofs on some of the garden structures. Just recently, we've finished a major conservation project on the trompe-l'oeil in the painting in the center of the formal greenhouse, supported by an external foundation. That painting is now in probably the best shape it's been since the 1960s when it was originally done. But perhaps the thing that I'm most delighted about in the garden is how it's come into its own from a programmatic point of view. When I first started, I thought to myself, this garden is really quite expensive. It needs, several staff salaries and regular, of course, operating cost inputs to keep it looking good. But is it anything more than just a beautiful backdrop to everything else we do at Oak Spring? What I would say now is that it is, of course, a beautiful backdrop to everything else we do at Oak Spring, but it's also used programmatically, and that gives me great pleasure. And I think the integration of the garden into the programmatic side of Oak Spring has really been an important change for us. And as I said, Alyssa Montgomery has done a great job with this. So, for example, in the spring, we have courses on spring bulbs led by an external expert who uses the garden as part of his the garden and the library as part of his course. We similarly have courses on spring and summer perennials that, again, use the garden in a didactic, a teaching way. And I think we'll see more of that in the future, because I think some of our best programs are programs like the bulb course that integrate the resources in the garden with the resources in the library. Where else can you go and see the magnificent variety of bulbs that Alyssa and her team have growing in the garden, and then also go to the library and look at books and manuscripts about tulipomania or the kinds of daffodils that were cultivated in the 19th century and so on. So I think these are great courses that bring these different resources here at Oak Spring together.
And of course, another common factor across the entire property is the wildlife, and perhaps the ponds, the creeks, the waterways, the interconnectivity of the entire property, Peter. Can we just talk a little bit about the waterways, the ponds, the creeks, and that sort of thing? Because they're so integral, and managing those is an operation in of itself to service not only the property, but look at the ecosystem that all of that embraces.
Yes, and I think that also comes back to how the land is managed around those waterways. So we have our property boundary is Goose Creek, so we're very interested in managing the land along Goose Creek, and we've managed to deal with we're starting to deal with some of the worst invasive species problems down there. And we've been delighted to see some of the terrific wildlife that we have associated with those streams. For quite some time, we'd heard reports of otters in Goose Creek, but it took us a long time. But eventually we did see them. We saw them first on camera traps, and then we got good photographs of them. It's fantastic to see those otters in the creek there, and looking after the amphibians and reptiles is an important part of making sure that the waterways are in good shape. What I would say, in terms of wetlands more broadly, is that for obvious reasons, considerable effort was put in during the time when this was a landscape for rearing horses, to draining the land. So we have field drains and so on in many of the fields. So they're in a way unnaturally dry. And one of the things that we've learned is that in this part of the world, we have springs popping up everywhere, at least during the wetter years. We certainly see them. And there were probably more of those around. And so one thing that we might consider is how we introduce a little more habitat heterogeneity into the landscape by creating and encouraging some more areas that used to be wet in the past, but that have now probably been drained. And I think that's important too for the amphibians and reptiles in particular.
As you look back, Peter, at these last 10 years, what have you found to be most fulfilling about your tenure?
I think that, creating something is always terribly fulfilling and enlivening. And so sometimes we need to stop and look back and think how far we've come. We're always so busy that sometimes we don't take time to reflect sufficiently on how far we've come. But I think, what's really important, I think, is, the great people in the community that we've met, but also the wonderful staff that we have here at Oak Spring, who are really just great to work with and who have put in so much effort to create what we have today. And I'd like to touch on one other area that's particularly important to me that we haven't spoken about yet, Chris, which is what we're doing in our local community. As we've gradually put the program together, we always had in mind that we wanted to have more impact in our local community. So a couple of years ago, we started a group that we call our LEO team, which is our local education and outreach team. And they're really doing tremendous work, I think, in the public schools, the local libraries, the senior centers in the area. And that, I think, is very fulfilling for us, because I think any institution that has, as we do, a national and even an international aspiration also needs to balance that with serving their local community. And the work that the local education and outreach team are doing is definitely part of that. And also the biocultural conservation farm. Last year, we grew, I think, slightly over 40,000 pounds of vegetables on the Rokeby, on a small plot on the Rokeby property. About 3/4 of that was donated to local food banks, and that's another way that we serve the local community. So that's been a really fulfilling part of this job, to put together a program that has an international dimension, for example, exhibits in the UK and China, national profile exhibits at the National Gallery, loans to the National Museum of Women and the Arts, and many other places, but also serving our local community, including through our Rokeby Community Festival that we'll now hold regularly every year at the end of September. So I think overall, what's particularly on my mind now is achieving that balance and really working for the benefit of the people in our local area.
This may be a much longer answer to this short question, Peter, but when you look back at your time here, what do you reflect on as what it has taught you the most and advanced your knowledge?
Oh, I learn something every day. That's why one keeps working, because there's always things to learn. And I think, particularly as we reach the 10-year anniversary, I think it's important to be a patient and to have a little bit of humility. Not everything can be done at once. There are things that need to be done immediately, but there are things that are really going to take time. And you have to reconcile yourself to the fact that some of these things are going to take a little while to really come to fruition. But after 10 years, I think we've got quite a lot done. And many things coming to fruition, but I'm sure that there'll be many more things. There'll always be more to do, and there'll always be new, exciting initiatives that we can push forward. But we need to be humble and patient in thinking about all of this. We can't do it all at once.
And what are you looking forward to, Peter?
I'm really looking forward to reconfiguring what used to be Mrs. Mellon's cut flower garden, and transforming that into a garden that our local education and outreach team can use for program for children. So we're taking part of what used to be Mrs. Mellon's cut flower garden and renovating that in such a way that it'll be really helpful for the children's programs, including, for example, the summer camp series that we initiated a couple of years ago. So that, I think, is a really big project for this year. Of course, we always have facilities and maintenance projects. We're delighted that we've been able to do some of the basic infrastructure issues, get the electrical supplies upgraded, get the fiber internet connections to all of the buildings. All of these things are sort of ongoing projects, and we're reaching the end of some of those projects this year. So I'm thrilled about that. I should also say this year is. We've been wondering about what our contribution to the 250th anniversary could be, and we're engaged in a project with an exciting project with Mount Vernon and the Mount Vernon Ladies Association on highlighting George Washington's interest and the energy he put in to farming. So based on the book, Washington at the Plough. And I think that'll be an interesting exhibit, and that will make available through this partnership with Mount Vernon to anyone across the country or anyone across the world who wants to have it. They'll be able to download it free from the website and then create their own physical exhibits if they're interested in doing that. And this exhibit will be launched at the Philadelphia Flower Show coming up later this year.
You mentioned, Peter, The Enchanting Interiors of Mrs. Bunny Mellon, the book that's in the works. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners about that title? Yes,
I mean, this is a really interesting project that we've been working on for several years, particularly Eleanor Crane and the folk in the library, Nancy Collins particularly, and also great volunteers. Mrs. Mellon, during the 70s, commissioned a young woman, a graduate of Wellesley College, to paint the interiors, watercolor paintings of the interiors of her homes in New York and Washington and here at Oak Spring. And I think Mrs. Mellon had the aspiration that those images would one day be published, but she never quite finished that project. So we've been able to finish the project and publish these illustrations. And I think they provide an amazing insight into these private worlds that the Mellons inhabited, looking back to the 70s. And I think people will be interested and perhaps even slightly astonished by some of these wonderful paintings. So the book will be released in February. I think it's the 17th of February, and we'll have an event at the Middleburg Community Center, followed by various events at other places to launch the book. So if people are interested in that, in the inside of the Mellon homes, then this is the book that they need to get, and I'm sure they'll enjoy Snowy Campbell's paintings. And as a special appendix in that book, we've been through each of the paintings to try and identify the objects that are included, and comparing that with the records here, and particularly the records of the Sotheby's sale that was held after Mrs. Mellon's passing. We've been able to identify a lot of the paintings and other objects in those images. So that's an interesting addendum to the book. And I think people will find that also that inventory, partial inventory of the Mellon homes, also very interesting.
And finally, Peter, is there anything else you would like to add as we come to your 10th anniversary?
No, but I just would love to thank all of the wonderful people, our neighbors who've been so gracious and welcomed me and Eleanor into this community. But I also want to thank particularly the Oak Spring staff who've done an enormous amount of hard work over the last 10 years and have really created something pretty special, which I think will live on far into the future. There'll always be more to do, but we should at least take the time to stop and look back and reflect on how far we've come. It's been a pretty wonderful journey, and the team deserve a huge amount of credit for it.
And we look forward, of course, to what lies ahead, Peter. We should remind everybody that they can find out a whole lot more about the Oak Spring Garden Foundation by going to the website, osgf.org, subscribing to the Oak Spring newsletter, as I mentioned, either on the website or by emailing program@osgf.org. You can also follow us on social media. And on Instagram, it's Oak Spring Garden Foundation. On X, it's Oak_Spring. And on Facebook, Oak Spring Garden Foundation. Peter, thank you so much for sharing those past 10 years with our listeners, and we look forward to the future and what lies ahead for Oak Spring Garden Foundation.
Thanks so much, Chris. Great talking to you, and thank you for your help with these wonderful podcasts.